Hi there. For my first field work, I'm going to be using option one, analyzing an event. And having been a youth pastor in my church for a number of years, 15 years, it's hard to find something I'm not familiar with, but we actually just had something tonight. One of the local campuses hosted an event called Converge, which was a bunch of area youth ministries coming together for a night of worship. And it was interesting because it was led by a group of students that kind of had a vision for it. So there's a group of like 30 students actually came together and had this vision and convinced all their youth groups to come together. And it was an awesome event full of energy. And but it was really interesting to analyze it through the lens of community, both the community of those worship leaders and the community of gathered youth groups. And I wasn't involved in any of it. One of the local campuses hosted it. So I really got to have an outside view. And it was interesting because it was bigger than expected and full of energy, but I'm not sure that it accomplished a lot of community building or in the way maybe they hoped. And thinking through the senses, so first of all, it was dark and loud, kept the house lights out, and there's loud band, and because of the number of students swapping in and out, they had a lot of guitars and stuff on stage, bright lights, and so there was a lot of sort of hype to the feel of the room, but it made it very difficult to interact in the crowd because either it was a pause between music when there was scripture being read or prayer, or it was just a loud time of worship, musical worship happening. It was also interesting. It was kind of cool. There were no chairs set up in the auditorium, and so that gave it a very casual, sort of organic and relational feel to the space. But there were also a lot of adults, older adults, who were sitting in chairs around the room, which made it feel like they were observing, not participating, and almost like the students were an object to be viewed, not something to engage with them. So it was interesting how that affected the community. And really, as I thought about it, it felt like that those group of student leaders who created this, they built a community. They all go to different churches, and they built a community in creating this. But I don't know that they built the greater community of youth ministries that all came together. I don't know that community was built between them. And I think maybe that's where the event, even though everyone loved it, didn't accomplish what it could have because they seemed most concerned with their worship community, if that makes sense. So thinking through the values, so like hospitality, there was definitely some hospitality. I guess we hosted it, and there was a lot of work. But it didn't feel like that the group of worship leaders, those students that pulled it together, really considered the crowd in their plans. Simply, they chose a lot of songs that they thought were cool and new, but you can tell the kids didn't know. And they got behind them. They got influenced with real energy. But when it was like singing a slower song that no one knew, you could just sense there wasn't as much engagement. And it felt like maybe inviting someone to your house, and you might have really good food, but you don't know if the people who were coming like it. Maybe they never tried it. And so it didn't seem like their first consideration in terms of being hospitable as worship leaders was the crowd. There wasn't necessarily a lot of truth telling that I knew. I wasn't involved in the practices. I do know at the end, I was talking to one of the students who was from our church who was involved, and he was helping with production and had conflict with one of the other kids who was doing conflict, and he just ended up kind of ignoring the other student and working around him. There wasn't a lot of truth telling. So I think their community, even in that sense, only got so deep. They did keep their promises. They practice. I mean, the music was amazing. The students on stage were amazing. Their hearts were amazing. And so they really kept their commitments in terms of practice and engagement. And that was pretty incredible to see. I don't know that forgiveness was any part of this. And there wasn't sort of a message for the event of forgiveness or anything like that. In terms of Christian formation, it's interesting. Again, the group of worshipers who came together, I'm sure that was a very formative time and a lot of work. But I don't know that for the crowd, I mean, as formative as a night with like a lot of musical worship without a lot of message. There was one local youth guy who gave a message, and it was what I would call like typical hype word salad for a youth group. It was funny and passionate, but I don't know, it didn't really make sense, and I felt like just a chance to sit down. So I'm not sure that anything was formed other than maybe a good reminder to the community that that there's a lot of followers of Jesus who love to be together and worship together. And then in terms of group spiritual direction, this was interesting. It felt like the group of students that came together, they had a couple of adults who kind of helped them musically, but what they needed was a mentor or a guide. They needed some spiritual direction. Someone asked them some questions as they go about why some of the decisions they were making and what sort of their purpose was in coming together. Were they driven by this event? Were they driven by their relationships? In what ways were they looking to serve the community? How are their decisions impacting that in terms of their plans? And so it felt like they did really good and everyone's excited, but they were missing that spiritual mentor and guide. And so overall, I think the event supported that group's community. I don't know that it built deep community in them because of the dynamics of it. We'll see. Hopefully it lasts in them, though some are going off to college, and it was built around this event. And then for the youth groups at large, it was cool to be together and in a room, worshiping together and recognize that we're not alone. But I didn't get a sense that it's going to lead to any form of deep community. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to look back 6 months from now and see where how this did this event serve to form any community, or did we actually just trade having time in our own separate youth ministries to build deeper real community for a large hype event? So we'll see where it lands.